Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Leon Vainstein speaking from Los Angeles, California. Again, there's a box full of news, and I want to tell you everything, but instead of covering everything broadly, today I'll take one topic and try to go deeper. Sometimes it's necessary to clarify what I meant, because people tend to make something up when they hear, from my point of view, something that's clear, but they end up imagining something completely opposite or just wrong. And then they start getting offended by their own made-up story. After my video with the conclusion that the attacks on airports in Russia and on the Crimean Bridge had a positive impact on the morale of Ukrainians, but they did nothing to change the overall situation on the fronts and rather negatively affected, well, let's say, the chances of ending the war, a storm of outrage fell upon my gray and not very hairy head. And the main accusations sounded approximately as follows. If you think, as most people for some reason decided, that they can address me informally just because they despise me, then go ahead. If you think that Russia, by the way, when I used to say to Ukraine, that outraged them, but addressing me informally doesn't outrage them at all. If you think that Russia can bomb us, but we can't bomb them, then you... Well, and then came the epithets and all sorts of words that you can't always say on air. Actually, the hot-headed Ukrainians are mostly not those who live in Ukraine, but those who, are in the United States, Canada, France, Germany, and Poland. And for the most part, they took their children as far away from the battlefield as possible. As soon as they hear something that doesn't fit into their cliché, so to speak, as Simonov once wrote, when it comes to Germans, wherever you see them, that's where they should be killed. So any deviation from this seems to them like a crime or as some kind of betrayal of something that, in fact, they themselves never really had. Here are some examples. And this reaction to what I said is roughly the following two brilliant operations by Ukrainian intelligence. Unfortunately, the warring sides have not moved closer to peace. Rather, on the contrary, they have instead raised the hopes of Ukrainians, and they will make Russians seek revenge to satisfy their bloodthirstiness. Or maybe I said bloodthirsty population, or maybe I said fascist-leaning population, something like that, so to speak. Something like that. But I conveyed the essence, everyone. So they started writing to me, Ukraine is being bombed, and you don't care. That's where you somehow felt that I said I don't care, or that I'm happy that Ukraine is being bombed. Furthermore, it's naive to think that if it weren't for this strike, Russia would have chosen peace. And again, I don't understand where I supposedly managed to say anything like that. I think I said that these operations, which will probably go down in history and textbooks, did not give Ukraine the necessary results in strategic terms. I don't know how it was possible to conclude something else from this. For instance, people often misspell my last name as Vainstein, no matter how many times they've seen it written correctly. This is not the only one. It's immediately clear that they're trying to say something bad. Vainstein is just a coward. If you mean not me, but you, us, you, America, yes, we need to be dragged into the war. So, Vainstein is just a coward if you need to be dragged into the war. I'm not even talking about the stupidity of this statement or its illiteracy. Instead, I want to tell you something. At the age of 24, I moved from the Soviet Union, from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to Israel, and at 28, I joined the army, where, let's say so to speak, at night, Entebbe. If you remember what it is, our artillery regiment, was transferred to the Suez Canal. We uncovered the barrel, raised them, aimed them at Alexandria. We fired on the Golan Heights. When the Lebanon operation began, I was in the United States at that time, and I took the first available flight back, rushed to Israel. Because our regiment, at that time I was already a reservist, was called up for emergency mobilization. In Israel, I have my family, friends, the graves of my great-grandfather and my parents. My grandfather is buried in the territory of the Soviet Union, or rather, my grandfather's. Besides that, in Israel, my emotions, I sympathize with Ukraine, and I know for sure that it was not Ukraine that started this massacre. I also sympathize with the Sudanese, the people of Mozambique, Guatemala, Congo, and Tibet. By the way, 2 of my artist friends were arrested in Tibet. And I wrote, spoke, even went there, delivered some collected money and resources. By the way, I did the same thing to help Ukraine, but I am not emotionally connected to Ukraine. My grandfather was born in Kharkiv. I've visited the city twice, but I don't know anyone there. And I've never met any of my relatives. As far as I can recall, I haven't met them. It's possible I did as a young child, but I can't remember. So for me, Ukraine is just another spot on the planet where there's a war going on. And from my point of view, the slaughter and destruction need to be stopped. It's not up to me to decide at what cost. That's for the participants to decide. I'm not an expert in wars. It seems I made it to the rank of a Freitor, yes? Even when I was discharged, I think they even gave me the rank of sergeant. That's it. Well, 2 stripes, sergeant or senior sergeant rank. So it seems to me that Ukraine will not be able to win back the occupied provinces in the coming years. I don't see who will come to help them. And China seems to be helping the other side. The United States doesn't want to get involved. And Europe, for the most part, neither has the strength nor the desire. And despite what they say and how they wave their hands, they keep buying energy resources from Russia and by doing so are practically financing the war with Ukraine. I don't see anyone except the United States trying to stop this war, and I don't see either side, I mean Russia and Ukraine, wanting to stop it. That is theoretically, yes. But when you really want something, you make compromises, you accept some losses to achieve your goal. You're present in a way. I desire this. Everything's fine and great, I owe nothing, I take and come, yes. No, here the conversation is about one side wanting you, and you want to get back what they seized. So if you can't beat them, you have to sacrifice something. I think I might be wrong. I know for certain that during negotiations, if you want to achieve something, you have to make sacrifices. There. Accordingly, if the war lasts another 2, 3, or 5 years, it's quite possible, it's already been going on for more than 3 years, then another 1 million people could die, well, let's say, and homes and buildings will be destroyed. Russia has its own weapons production, plus a lot of money. And they buy weapons and soldiers both from North Korea, China, and Iran. Since 1990, Ukraine has steadily lost its production capacity, including military production. After the Maidan and Yanukovych's escape, the country's policy became anti-Russian, and many actions were taken that shouldn't have been done if you don't have an army. You shouldn't provoke a drunken thug if you don't have a club. That is, well, you can try, of course, but something very bad might happen, which is exactly what happened. Ukraine, I'm not justifying the drunken thug. So you understand, Ukraine was hoping that at the right moment, an uncle from across the border would come and hit the aggressor with a club. And Ukrainians can for now spend their time and earnings on improving their standard of living. Well, it's clear that's great. But ID has been making Europe for 40 years now, by the way, with the same result as Ukraine. Next, having chosen an actor, there's nothing wrong with this profession, but besides that, he hasn't really done much else. Yes, a musical comedy actor. I understand that's not any better than a drama actor or, say, a director. Ballet master. But without any real skills to lead a country. Instead of strengthening defense capabilities and the promised peace with Russia, I'll come. And so Obama promised us that the oceans would recede from the shores, meaning the water level in the oceans would go down. And Zelensky promised that he would bring peace with Russia, but nevertheless, he went and broke yet another agreement with Russia. That is, the adults in Ukraine were not thinking about the good of the country, but were listening to the advice of Boris Johnson, Victoria Nuland, and other Soros-backed figures. But after all, gentlemen, you are elected to your positions so that you use your own heads and make decisions based on what the country needs. And not for some foreign buddy with his own ideas, by the way, about the ultimate goal and benefit, and in general what they want. Because what your buddy is advising you today might be aimed at satisfying his own goals, not yours. You should kind of figure it out and try to understand it. But it's not just about demining instead of mining, or disarmament instead of strengthening defenses. On the world stage, Ukraine managed to vote for recognizing Israel as an aggressor and an apartheid state. When the United States asked to hand over materials related to the investigation of American citizens, the response was mockery. In the 24th year, so to speak, the president of Ukraine flew in to campaign for one of the presidential candidates. Then there was a dirty scandal in the Oval Office. I don't even want to figure out who's to blame and who's not. What I want to say is that it's mistake after mistake, and in the military, in the economic, in the political aspect, and in personal relationships, which, strangely enough, are also important in politics. All of this is the result of corruption and the elections that were made by the people, and then by those whom the people chose. Personally, I think that the most vile regime on the territory of Europe is Russia. There, scum from the Committee for State Security have merged with scum from the criminal world, and they behave towards their own population and towards the world exactly as scum are supposed to behave. What else can you expect from them? Anything else? Yes. If it smells like a chicken, if it runs and clucks like a chicken, then most likely it's a chicken, yes. And the most corrupt regime is Ukraine on that same territory of Europe. A leadership that shamelessly stole from its own soldiers, stealing even from the howitzers that were sent in non-working, non-firing condition, while the money allocated for repairs was stolen, and the soldiers were sent non-working howitzers. Down to the bullets, helmets, and body armor, which, for example, several children of my acquaintances were offered to buy themselves after they were drafted into the army. And from the ones that were sent as donations, that is, we sent them from here as donations, there apparently some kind of leadership, I don't know at what level, would take it, and then try to either sell it to the soldiers, the servicemen, even to their own relatives, to the Ukrainians with whom they were together. They are defending themselves from the bad Putin, so these are the good Ukrainians defending themselves from the bad Putin. Ukraine is a transparent country where determined people live, who have risen up for their piece of land, for their homeland, for their fatherland. Moreover, it is run by thieves and scoundrels. Maybe, by the way, as soon as someone becomes a leader among Ukrainians, they immediately turn into a thief and a scoundrel. Or maybe scoundrels just don't let decent people into power. Anything is possible. You know, in our universities, the leftists also started to seize power, and then they began to push out everyone who wasn't leftist and only hire leftists. That's right. Maybe there's something else going on there in Ukraine that we can't understand from afar. I'm not trying to figure out exactly what's happening in Ukraine. I'm trying to understand what's going on between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States of America. So, Ukraine is the only former Soviet republic that, compared to 1989, well, with the collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and so on, not only didn't increase, but actually significantly decreased its production volume by about 30%. I lied. Ukraine and Moldova are the only two that didn't increase. The others increased, some by 2.5 times. So Ukraine produces 30% less in volume than what it produced in 1989. And it's not even the same because there used to be all sorts of high-precision machines and other machinery manufacturing, and now more of what is extracted comes from what's found in the ground. Well, all right, you've listened to me, and now let's listen to the Americans. For example, let's listen to Steve Bannon.
Read what Putin told him. These guys from the KGB, they're not really prone to grand rhetoric. They're more inclined toward action. They were humiliated. The attack on Ukrainians was a daring move that revealed the fragility of their unity and nuclear capabilities, leaving them humiliated. They didn't go up against regular troops and weren't planning to capture some Wagner mercenary battalion. They went in to destroy the equivalent. It would be the same as if Mexican cartels flew into Omaha and destroyed the Air Force's strategic command. 40% of it is on the runway wing to wing. Putin was straightforward. President Trump said he doesn't believe peace talks will happen soon and that the United States will respond to any actions taken against it harshly. People should take it as a papal bun. These people are not joking. They are really not joking. And as I have already warned, we are relentlessly being drawn into a large-scale conflict on the Eurasian continent.
Let me explain what Steve was trying to say. The operation is remarkable, meaning the flight, searching for drones over the bridge and the like. But psychologically, it will not cause panic among Russians, but rather a surge of bitter Jesuit KGB-style vengeance. Let me clarify with an example. Ukraine says that Russian planes were supposed to take off and bomb Ukraine. So what does that mean? That's exactly what they did. There was a warning operation with drones which were stationed there near the airports, and that means they had been there for quite a while already. And so the planes had to take off, and so to speak, that's when they were stopped. Let's imagine that Russian planes took off. I'm telling you about a different scenario, one that would have been perceived completely differently by the world. They took off, dropped their bombs, and came back. And this happens on the eve of negotiations. That is, now it's not Ukraine that's disrupting the negotiations, but Russia. So these planes came back, and as soon as they landed, drones took off and attacked. The whole world would now understand that this is a response. The whole world would be stunned that Ukraine can immediately respond to Russian actions, no matter where their weapons are located. Russia would be shocked that Ukraine can find out so quickly what they are doing and respond, and they would start being afraid of their own shadow. So, conversations with Putin would be about the fact that retribution has come for your action, for your attempt to disrupt negotiations, not that Ukraine tried to disrupt the negotiations. Right now, the attack on Russian airports is perceived as an attempt to disrupt negotiations, as a refusal to try to solve the problem. You might say that Russia wouldn't have done it anyway, doesn't want to, won't go, wouldn't have gone. Well, then there really is no way out. If Russia wouldn't have, doesn't want to, won't go, won't do it, you can't negotiate with them. Yes, another 3, 5, 10 years, 30 years of war. In France, they fought the 30 Years' War. Why not have a 30 Years' War in Ukraine and Russia? Then there's no way out, absolutely none. Hundreds of thousands killed, maybe even more territory captured. More mothers without children, more children without fathers, more wives without husbands, and more colleagues on the streets of Ukrainian cities. And now I want to let you hear from the Americans. The opinion of a very popular person here, Matty Moores. Well, like Morse, yes, that's really his last name.
Moreover, Russia and Ukraine are actively escalating the whole situation, as we all just saw in the example of this recent drone attack. Personally, I believe Ukraine has the right to defend itself, but I also think that the United States has already done more than enough to try to resolve this whole situation. And at this point, it's probably time for us to just completely step aside.
Dear Ukrainians, this is the prevailing opinion of the American people. The people here. Not the layer you usually deal with, but the people here. Not to give, not to rush to help, but enough. If they don't want peace, let them fight, but without us. This is the opinion of the people right now. This is what I'm trying to explain to the hotheads who want to give Ukraine to Putin, first destroying the population of all of Ukraine. They do this under the slogan, "Not an inch to Pogubnum, we'll fight to the last." Ukrainians there, as they pronounce it there, that's it. And in America, they go crazy over this.
But if you want to see something crazy, take a look at this. Just 2 days after a massive drone attack destroyed Russian military equipment worth more than $7 billion at a depth of more than 4,300 kilometers inside Russian territory, Zelensky now claims he wants a ceasefire after hearing that Putin is planning a large-scale punitive retaliatory operation. Now Zelensky wants a peace agreement. Friends, you can't make this up. Some people like to argue that we can do both things at once, chew gum and walk at the same time. We can help everyone around the world and take care of Americans at the same time, but honestly, I'm not sure that's even true. For decades, we've been involved in various foreign conflicts, and all that's happened is that the United States has slowly declined year after year. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I've already said, between us, I think it's time to really put America first.
Before it became clear that the leadership of Ukraine doesn't want any compromises in exchange for peace, Americans saw Ukraine as a victim. But as they began to better understand the views and positions of Ukraine, this sympathy turned into a feeling that Ukraine thinks that America or the world, but in some way they owe them something. And this, at least for the people here, judging by the demonstrations in France, Italy, Germany, and so on, they also felt it. But the people here really didn't like it. At the same time, America understands what Russia is and who Putin is.
Putin is evil, but he's also a psychopath. Did you know that Russia's losses, killed and wounded in Ukraine, are approaching 1 million? For what?
What?
Is he planning to take revenge for the Ukrainian attack on the plains? Well, what do you think? This is war. Should Ukraine just let you bomb them and not respond? And Ukraine blew up the bridge that leads to Crimea. That bridge cost $32 billion. It was built by the Russians, and they blew it up in such a way that the Ukrainians aren't giving up. Next, Europe must take the initiative. 5, I mean that the toughest economic sanctions must be imposed against Russia in history. Now, China would have violated these sanctions. A week ago in Beijing, I told Chinese politicians, don't become allies of a mentally unstable person. This will end badly. If someone is ready to accept 1 million casualties for the sake of invading a small country and his army can't even defeat their army, you don't want to be on his side here. That's what I told the Chinese. The whole dynamic here is like that, you see? And all of this is interconnected. China, Russia, Iran. It's all connected. China, Russia, Iran.
Rayleigh just returned from China, where he was asked to talk about the United States' position on foreign policy issues, let's put it that way, about foreign policy issues. This question was asked by the top leadership of the Communist Party. But let's move on to the conclusion, that is, to reflecting on events and their integration, that is, to connecting them into a unified worldview. By the way, don't forget that this Sunday, and actually every Sunday at 10 in the morning Los Angeles time, which is 2000 hours in Kyiv, I do live broadcasts where for about half an hour I talk about how to remake the world, our life with you. Really, so that nothing nuclear explodes in the middle of our world, and so that we can live much better, or at least a little better and safer. And then, after 30 or 35 minutes of this talk, it's your questions and comments, and we'll see. Maybe I'll be able to answer your questions. So now, as they say in America, let's put on our thinking cap for some reflection. That's what they call it. So, a conversation took place between the presidents of the United States and China. As a result, negotiations on tariffs will be resumed. We don't know if the negotiations touched on the Ukraine-Russia issue, but I think they did. And I think that SII sees that for 3 years, SII has not been able to advance deeper into the country's territory, much less of it. Yet it is still capable of striking deep behind enemy lines after 3 years of attrition and war. I think we talked about Iraq. I think China doesn't want a nuclear Iran. But much in Putin's behavior now will depend on China's attitude toward this. So the Russians are agitated and demanding blood. The United States will most likely stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, and Europe, represented by the Chancellor of Germany, will follow suit. But they need United States permission to supply the weapons that were, in general, purchased from the United States, as well as a promise to deliver new ones in exchange for those transferred to Ukraine. That's why he came. At least, that's what I suspect. It seems that Ukraine doesn't have enough money to pay the army's salaries, $4 billion a year that the European Union promised, and there's not even enough for medicine and baby food. There are fewer and fewer rockets, mines, shells, and bullets. At the same time, Ukraine is not going to make any territorial concessions or anything else. And any concession to the aggressor is apparently perceived as betrayal of the homeland and treason against the interests of the great Ukrainian people. Well, the question immediately arises, given this whole position and everything I told you last time, right now. I was telling you about how today's situation is perceived within American society. How the people who are, as they say, at the top, there around the White House area, in Congress decisions and so on, perceive it. Steve Bannon and the host, who has 500,000 subscribers. So, a normal popular guy who gets quoted from time to time. But these are the people, yes, gentlemen. To the question, what will happen? I unfortunately have to answer as follows at the moment. I think maybe everything will change tomorrow, but for now the answer is this. For now, things will only get worse. I'm sorry, I'm an optimist by nature and I like to end on an optimistic note, but right now I can't because I'm shocked. See you.